Shalom, shalom, Israel. First and foremost, I'd like to give all thanks and honor and praises to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Wahab, Wakah, Kodash. Also, I'd like to give a greetings to Israel. So I'm going to read it in Lashon Kodash and then I'll read it in English. Anak Nawa, Nathan, Mashana Kabadiam, Laha, Makwawa, Bakaya, Laha Zaquanium, Laha Akiam, Wa Aqua, Waha Amath, Waha Bani, Shalia Sha'ala, Shalawam, Wa Ahab, Barakatham. And in the English that would read, give double honors to the elders, to the hopeful elect, to the brothers and to the sisters in the truth, and also the children of Israel. Peace and love bless you all. So, what I'd like to do today is a very, very short lesson. It was prompted by a video that my beloved Awadiah sent to me, which was a video of a heroin addict outsmarting detectives and getting off a case, right? So, within the video, they shared a little bit of information, and I did the research and I pulled it up. So the information in the video they shared was the techniques that the detectives use. I believe all police use this technique, but they listed it out as the Reid technique. So I was interested to know what was the technique that detectives use to get oftentimes innocent Jakes to confess to crimes that they did not commit. So I'm going to share it with you because I downloaded it. I did a little research in it, so I'm going to share it with you. So it's called the Reid technique, right? So yeah, the 3 pages. So let me just share the 3 pages so you can screenshot it. I haven't highlighted it as you can see, but you could just screenshot the information. That's page 1. This is page 2. And that's page 2 and page 3. I'm going to read it out for you guys as well. But I think it's very important that this information gets out. It's not new information, but I don't think everybody's aware of the techniques that the police and detectives use to gain confessions, oftentimes getting innocent people to confess for crimes that they did not commit. So let me just read this. The Reid technique, which is the technique that most, if not all, detectives use, right? It's a method of interrogation, right? So straight away you have to realize that this technique is being used to interrogate you. It's not being used to get, how to put it, it's not being used to get information from you voluntarily, yeah? So interrogation techniques, they sort of force information out of you as opposed to you freely volunteering the information. The system was developed in the United States of America by John E. Reid in the 1950s. Reid was a polygraph expert and former Chicago police officer, so that's his credentials. The technique is known for creating a high pressure environment for the interviewee, followed by sympathy and offers of understanding and help. In other words, good cop, bad cop, right? Or one police officer plays a good guy, the other police officer plays the bully. But only if a confession is forthcoming. So the offer of help and understanding, it only comes when the person volunteers to confess or confesses, and then the empathy bit kicks in. Since its spread in the 1960s, it has been a mainstay of police procedure. So basically, since John Reid created this technique of interrogating and forcing, some may argue, confessions from innocent people, it's now become a standard police procedure, um, especially in the United States. I would say the whole world, to be quite honest. Proponents of the Reid technique say it is useful in extracting information from otherwise unwilling suspects. Unwilling meaning they do not consent to volunteer the information. So it's a form of coercion, it's a form of bullying. Critics say the technique results in an unacceptably high rate of forced confessions. So, unacceptably is basically if you force one innocent person to confess when he was innocent, that is unacceptable. And I think it's quite more than one. But I'm just saying that would be unacceptable according to the Hatorah and according to Yahweh Basham Yahushua. That would be an unacceptable confession. Um, Especially from juveniles. So they're using it on minors, so people that do not have the mental fortitude to withstand these techniques. And the mentally impaired, so they're using it on people that have mental impediments, which I don't believe they should use it on the mentally impaired either. Criticisms has also been leveled in the opposite case, that against strong-willed interviewees, the technique causes them to stop talking and give no information whatsoever, which is basically what you should do, whether you're innocent or you're guilty, and you're being interviewed by the police. The first thing you should do is demand your rights, one of which is the right to remain silent. The other one is the right to not self incriminate yourself. That's a right as well. That against strong will, I've read that already. Yeah, let me read it again. That against strong-willed interviewees, the technique causes them to stop talking and give no information whatsoever, rather than elicit lies that can be checked against for the guilty or exonerated details for the innocent. So this is a little background on the individual called John E. Reid. In 1955, in Lincoln, Nebraska, John E. Reid helped gain a confession from a suspect, Darrell Parker, for Parker's wife's murder. So he would have been an obvious suspect because most murder victims, according to statistics, are murdered by somebody very close to them, a family member, a spouse, or a next of kin, or somebody that frequents their home, according to statistics. So obviously, this individual would have been a suspect, right? But check this now. This case established Reed's reputation and popularized his technique. Parker recanted his confession the next day. So Reed employed this technique on the individual. He confessed. The day afterwards, he recanted, meaning he said, look, that confession was an incorrect confession. I take it back. But it was admitted to evidence at his trial. So they still admitted it, even though he recanted it. He was convicted by a jury and sentenced to life in prison. Now, bearing in mind, according to the Haftarah, you need two or more witnesses to even take a matter to the judge, which would be, the chief priests, or the elders, or the principal men of the tribes, right? That's why you have 12 jury members, because it represents the 12 principal men of each tribe. And then the judge would be, well, Yahweh Shem Yahushua, but the judge would be the chief priest. He would be the judge, right? That's basically how the court system is set up based on the Haftarah. Let me see. Yeah, he recanted his confession. He was sentenced to life. He was later determined to be innocent. So after all of that palaver, come to find out, he actually was innocent. When he recanted his confession, that was the correct thing. because he was manipulated into confessing, right? Let me get back to it. He was determined to be innocent after another man confessed and was found to have been the perpetrator. So the guilty individual came forward, confessed, and then they checked his evidence and realized, no, this is the guy, right? Parker sued the state for wrongful conviction. Bearing in mind, this is in the 1950s, 1955, and it paid him $500,000 in compensation. So you have to know, $500,000 in 1955 would be equivalent to like $50 million, to be quite honest. Because you could have bought a house in them days for maybe a thousand bucks, or something like that, $2,000. So the amount of things you could have done with 500,000, which is half a million, is most probably what you could do with 50 million. So it was a substantial amount of money he won. So this is the first time it was used. It garnered a forcible confession. However, it was proven to be incorrect. The state had to pay the guy money. So obviously, the first time you used it, it failed, right? Because you didn't get a guilty man convicted. You got an innocent man convicted. So that's a failure, right? Um, In spite of Parker's false confession, Reid co-authored a text explaining his interrogation techniques. So what happened was, rather than people saying, look, we shouldn't use this technique because it caused an innocent man to be found guilty, what everybody said was, look, we need to figure out how you did that. Because if you could force an innocent man to plead guilty, you could also force a guilty man to plead guilty, right? Because he is guilty, right? So rather than people shunning it, they actually inquired of his technique furthermore. So then what he did, he wrote it down. Um, let me see. Yeah, explaining his interrogation technique. Reid died in 1982, so that's not really relevant information whether he died or he lived. What we're getting into is the technique he created and why it's causing so many of the black Latinos and native or indigenous aborigines to be arrested for crimes that they did not commit. Right? So we're delving into what is it about this technique that causes our people to be vulnerable or susceptible to the technique. Um, yeah. But his company, so he set up a company, John E. Reid and Associates, that was the name of it, continued. So after he died, they still continued with the company. As of 2013, it was led by President Joseph Buckley. So I'm not sure if he's still the president, but of 2013 he was, who had been hired by Reid. So I'm assuming he was hired by Reid and personally trained in the technique. So he would have been the principal expert when he was running the company. Yeah. So it was led by Joseph Buckley, who was the president in 2013, who had been hired by Reid. By that year, the company had trained more interrogators than any other company in the world. So this is just substantiating the claim that I made, that I believe that every single police is using a variation of the Reid interrogation technique. So they might tweak it a bit, but basically it's the same technique they're using. Yeah, Reed's technique had been adapted or adopted by law enforcement agencies of many different types, with it being especially influential in North America. I would say the world, because North America is the spiritual head of the world, right? Alongside with Europe, EU, and Great Britain. But they're the heads of the beast. So they would influence, the head and the neck influences the body. So I would say the whole world are influenced by this technique. The Reid technique consists of three phases. So now we're getting into the technique itself. Three-phase processes, beginning with fact analysis. So fact analysis is done by, in a sense, we do that too when we test the spirit. So fact analysis is done when somebody engages in a verbal intercourse with you, um, a discussion or a debate, but they entice you to give up information, right? So there's a specific technique that's used to entice you to give up information. And then when you give up information, there's another detective or detectives, plural, that are watching the interview and they have access to the internet or they may call up the patrol cop to go and check. If he said, oh, the door was blue, so the patrol cop might go and check and see, yeah, the door actually was blue, red. So they fact check. Because what they're attempting to do is find any inconsistency in what you say so that they can use it against you, right? So that's why you're required by lawyers and also by your rights to keep your mouth shut, keep quiet, because they're using everything you say against you. Yeah, so beginning with the fact analysis, followed by the behavior analysis interview. So also what they also have is trained psychologists and psychiatrists, but also some of the senior detectives. They go on courses and they train them in the techniques as well. So eventually what happens is the understanding that every human being has of non-verbal communication. And the reason why I say that is because it has been proven that I think it's 75 to 80% of all communication is non-verbal, meaning it's not what's coming out of your mouth. It's the way you say it, it's the tone you say it, it's your expression, it's your eyes, it's your body language. So all of this put together creates almost like a form of a lie detector, one could argue. Yeah. It's not that strict, but one could argue that you could use that ability to almost sense or almost discern if somebody's lying or not, along with fact checking as well. Right. Um, a non accusatory interview designed to develop investigative and behavioral information. So, in other words, what they do, so this is actually done before you go into the interview room. So before you go into the interview room, it might be when you're stopped by a police officer because you fit the description or because you're black while driving or whatever reason why you're stopped. And then the preliminary conversation is non-accusatory, meaning it's almost as if you meet somebody for the first time and you're trying to be a friend and you're asking certain questions and rare, but it's done in a very friendly, non-threatening manner because that's the best way to extract information, right? So that's the first step. So there's certain things that you may have said that they write down in their notepad, but now most officers have recording device on them, which would be able to actually record your face and your mannerisms and what you're saying, along with a written thing, which you should never sign, by the way. They get you to sign it, you should never sign. But that's another step. Then after that, followed, so after they've done that, they've got that information, then they follow that up, when appropriate, by the Reid 9 steps of interrogation, which is the crucial element of his, or I would say now, of the police procedural interrogation technique, because all of them are using or variations of it. According to process guidelines, individuals should be interrogated only when the information developed from the interview and investigation indicate that the subject is involved in the commission of the crime. So we already know that this is like a mission statement, but this is not how it's being employed. And how do we know that? Because the first time they used it, the guy was innocent, right? This is saying you should only use it when you know the guy's guilty, or that the subject is involved in the commission of the crime. So in other words, you know he's guilty. The first time they used it, the guy was innocent, right? And many other um, blacks, Latinos, Native Americans, indigenous Aborigines are rotting in prison right now and have been let out of prison only as a result of DNA evidence, which substantially proves that they were not the individual. That's the only reason why a lot of people have been released out of jail. But there's so many people that were in jail because of this technique. Right. So this is the reason why I'm doing a lesson on it, because this is a serious thing. This is um. So let me continue. In the Reid technique, interrogation is an accusatory process. So now, after they've extracted the information, right, which you don't know that's what they're doing, because they're asking you little subtle questions like, oh, yeah, where do you live? Where do you work? Da, 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 da. But they do it in a chummy way, so you volunteer information as well, which is recorded or written down, right? Now that information is handed over to the detective. So when the detective is asking you questions, he already has answers to the questions, some of them, that he's asking you. If you misspeak, or if you say something that doesn't match with what you have written here, right? Then that's going to be one of the things they're going to use against you, right? So they're using your own words against you. And the thing is, they never read you your rights until after they've gone through most of this process. So by the time they've got the information to incriminate you, then they read you your rights. So that when you go in court and the judge says, did the police officer read you your rights? You're going to say, yeah. But the thing is, yeah, you read you your rights, but when did he read it? Did he read it as soon as he stopped you? Because as soon as he stopped you, he's supposed to read you your rights. If he does that, you're not supposed to say a thing. So now the onus is on the police to prove guilt, which you are supposed to have according to law. You're supposed to have. I'm trying to find a legal way to say it, but I'll just say it how it's usually said. You are presumed innocent until proven guilty. So that's supposed to be your status. You're supposed to be presumed an innocent person until proved guilty. But what they do, they flip it around and presume you guilty, and you now have to try and prove yourself innocent, which he's not the judge or the court. So by you doing that, you're just giving them information to further incriminate you, right? Which is what we've been doing for years and years and years. Because we're dealing with a snake. We're dealing with the beast, the snake that tricked Eve. We're dealing with the dragon that's mentioned in Revelation. It's not. It's a spiritual entity that it was made crooked, right? That cannot be made straight. So you have to understand what it is you're dealing with. Yeah, I'm rambling a bit, but it's something that's I'm passionate about as well. Right, so let me get back to it. The interrogation is an accusatory process in which the investigator tells the suspect that the result of the investigation clearly indicates that they did commit the crime. So, in other words, they lie to the subject and say that we have evidence that you did it. So now you're trying to defend yourself rather than being presumed innocent and them having to prove you guilty. They state that you're guilty and now you have to prove yourself innocent, which is a breach of law, by the way. Um, the interrogation is in the form of a monologue, right, presented by the investigator rather than a question and answer format. So the reason why it's a monologue is because in a question and answer format, you can extract information. I would even go so far as to say you could extract more information from the question that is being asked of you than the answer to the question if you have the spirit of discernment. So, based on a question somebody asks you, you could already determine where they're going with it. Because you're like, why are you asking me that? Well, where were you at? Why are you asking me where I was? Or what time did you leave? Why are you asking me what? You should be thinking that. Oh, so in other words, you're trying to match me with the time that the event occurred. That's what you're trying to do, just based on the question. Um, yeah, anyway, it's based on a form of a monologue. So in other words, they tell you what happened, right? And then you now have to try and counter what they're saying. But it's not like a question and answer format. The demeanor of the investigator during the course of an interrogation is ideally understanding, patient, and non-demeaning. So this is why a person like myself, I'm going to use myself as an example, would not be good at this. Because a person like myself, I have a very demonstrative face, so that I can't, if it's, when I'm, in spirit or I'm passionate, you see in my face, I can't be Mr. Calm and Mr. Smooth and Mr. I can't. You see, even if I'm speaking like that, my mannerisms and my facial expressions would sell me out. So the people that can and do this are the people mentioned in the book, right? They have the spirit of Cain, the I Shashawadawan, right? The beast that's spoken of in Revelation. It's a certain spirit, it's a certain mentality they have, right? According to Maccabees, when Alexander and them took over, the world became more exceedingly wicked, right? Because they are the wicked as listed out in Job. Right. So I'm not going to be doing any precepts today, but I'm still going to be mentioning precepts because you know I'm a Hebrew Israelite. That's how we speak. We don't speak like regular people. Let me see. Boom, boom, boom. Yeah. So the the demeanor of the investigator during the course of an investigation, Salakia, during the course of an interrogation is ideally understanding, patient, and non-demeaning. So non-demeaning means non-threatening. It also means you're not, your face is not showing that you believe the person to be guilty or you believe the person to have done something wrong. So your face has changed to a sympathetic, or I'm with you arc, or I believe what you're saying arc. But deep in your heart, you're plotting the downfall of the person you're interrogating. That's the mindset they have. It's a crooked mindset. The Reid technique uses goal. So the goal of the person using the technique is to make the suspect gradually more comfortable with. Now it says here with telling the truth, but I would slightly alter that and say with telling the truth they want to hear. So that's how they gather false confession. Because when you're telling them the truth, they keep on at you, on at you, on at you until you realize that look, that's not what they want to hear. And then eventually you're responding to what they want to hear. And then when they hear what they want you to say, that's when they let me go back up because it mentioned it up. That's when they so okay, let me find it. Yeah, that's when it's followed. That's when the interviewee is followed by sympathy and offers of understanding and help. Right. Then it's got a comment. It says only if a confession is forthcoming. So body language. So if you feeling that you're saying something and they're aggressive and they're showing, oh yeah, you're gonna do that and you're gonna go through where you change your tap because you're in a pressure situation and you're trying to get yourself out of a situation, out of a trap actually, without having the understanding of what the trap is and how it works. So you play into the trap because you're not aware of the way this trap is created. And it's created for us as well, by the way. It's created for us, right? Because the video that prompted this lesson, if you see how easily the Edomite got himself out of this, because he thinks like them, so they can't trick him with a trick that they all have. He's looking at him like, I'm an Edomite, you can't use this on me, it don't work. And it didn't work on the Edomite. Let's put it like that. But anyway, so that's page one. So we're on page two now. Right. Let me pull it up. The Reid technique uses goal is to make the suspect gradually more comfortable with telling the truth, untruth. This is accomplished by the investigators first imagining. So straight away, this is off, because if getting somebody to confess is based on the investigators first imagining, what that's actually saying is the investigator has a pre-existing bias. In other words, he believes you to be guilty, right? He imagine you to be guilty, which that's not supposed to be the presumption. There's supposed to be a presumption of innocence, and the investigator is supposed to follow the leads, i.e., follow the evidence to come to a conclusion, not have a pre-existing imagination or idea, right? So that should throw out a case, but they're all doing it. So this is part of their procedure. This is why I'm reading it out. And then offering the suspect various, listen to this, psychological constructs. So what is a psychological construct? Is basically a wicked imagination, right? And we know that the heart is wicked above all things, the tongue as well, right? It's very wicked. It's a very wicked organ. Yeah. This is something else, man. Psychological constructs as justification for their behavior. So in other words, they accuse a person from an imagination, meaning I think he did it, right? That's what it means. So then they accuse the person when, according to law, a person is supposed to be innocent, presumed, until proven innocent, right? Then after they do that, they create psychological constructs, right? Which is basically another way of saying they create traps using the psychology of Jakes, which is different in opposition to the psychology of Cain slash Aishoa Adoam slash the beast, because it's one and the same spirit, right? It's a contrary spirit. For example, an admission of guilt might be prompted by the question. So when they get the person to admit guilt, then they will ask the question like, did you plan this out or did it just happen on the spur of the moment? Now, this question is a very vital question as well, because this question now will decide if a person does life or if he gets executed or if he gets 20 years with the hope of parole, based on the answer of this question, because this goes to motive and premeditation, right? So look how they're trapping you, right? There's no mention of a lawyer. There's no mention of, oh, you've got the right to remain silent. This is, they get you, they got you, and then they will read you your rights. This is what they've been doing to our people. This is called an alternative question, which is based on an implicit assumption, see, assumption of guilt, which contradicts the law, because you're supposed to have an assumption of innocence until you prove the individual guilty. So they flipped it around. Um, Critics regard this strategy as hazardous, arguing that it is subject to confirmation bias, which is what I explained. So they have an idea of guilt, which is confirmation bias, and then they force or impose that onto the individual to get them to confess, likely to reinforce inaccurate beliefs or assumptions and may lead to prematurely narrowing an investigation, meaning that they already have a presumed perpetrator. So there's three people in a shop. Somebody nicked something. There's a black guy with a hoodie on, there's a white guy with a suit, and there was a Chinese girl with a fan, right? So they discount the Chinese girl with a fan, they discount the European guy with a suit, and the Jake with a hoodie. You're the victim. Sorry, you're the perpetrator. Right. This is before they've determined. So they haven't done a search. They haven't looked at the CCTV camera. They haven't asked any question. Just based on a preconceived bias, they go straight to the Jake. Right. This is what this is showing. Right, so now we're getting to the steps. So all of that is leading to the actual steps or the actual techniques. Right, so now we're getting to the techniques. 9 steps of interrogation. The Reid techniques, 9 steps of interrogation are: 1. Positive confrontation. Right. So what is positive confrontation? Positive means active. Right. So active, so you're physically, actively confronted. So negative would be, it's also very insidious, by the way. So negative confrontation, the psychological term for that is passive aggressive. And passive aggressive is a deadly form of aggression because it's pent up. So what happens is when it manifests itself, so a passive aggressive could give you a grain of cyanide every day for a year. So by the time you realize you're dying, you literally were dead from when the confrontation occurred. That's how serious that form of confrontation is. But anyway, I'm straying again. Let me go back. Positive confrontation. Advise the suspect that the evidence has led the police to the individual as a suspect. So, in other words, they're lying because if you have a presumption of innocence, which is what you're supposed to have, then you're only going to arrest an individual if there's enough circumstantial evidence to support the charge, which goes back to the Bible, because you can only bring an individual in front of the judge if you have enough circumstantial evidence and 2 or more witnesses, without which you couldn't. So, everything that they do, they nick from us. So, this is one of the things they stole from us. So, let me get back. Um, Right. Advise the suspect that the evidence has led the police to the individual as a suspect. Offer the person an early opportunity to explain why the offense took place. So the reason why it states early opportunity because they don't want the individual to lawyer up and they don't want the severity of the situation to hit the individual because what happens is there's certain stages to, let's put it like this, there's certain stages to grief. So the first stage is shock, the second stage is depression, the third stage might be reaction where you're reacting and you did it, and then at some point acceptance. So what it is, they don't want the individual to get to the point of where he accepts the situation he's in and then try to figure out how he's going to counter it because he accepts shit. This is some serious shit. I need to do something. They want to get you before you get to that stage, right? Which is just shock. You're still shocked. You're still like in disbelief. Like, oh shit, what did you do? So that's why they want to get it early because once they got that information, they're going to use your information against you. Right. Um, right. So that was point 1. Point 2. Try to shift the blame away from the suspect to some other person or set of circumstances that prompted the suspect to commit the crime. So that is also a psychological technique. You know me, I just say it as it is. A lot of women, including our women, use this technique, right? So what they do, they catch you out and then they give you an out as to why you did what you did, right? But by doing that, it relaxes you and it allows you to say certain things and then they get information. And you're thinking, well, yeah, everything's cool. No, everything's done at that point, but she just want to get more information on your ass, right? That's how they roll, right? So our women actually are the best detectives in the world. And that's a fact. Our women, if they want to find you, they'll find you. If they want to get information out of you or from you, they know what to do that. And that's a fact. But that's another story as well. So let's get back again. So the technique is to shift, not shift all of the blame. I would say not the blame. I would say shift the reasons for the action or the consequences for the action, but still leaving the action, i.e., the guilt of the action, on the individual. They're not removing that. They're removing the consequences of it at that time or the reasons for it at that time. Why? Because they want you to run your mouth like a tap, basically. Um, that is develop themes. So, what is a theme? A theme is not a real thing. So, I'll give you an example. This is real. The Haftarah Watana, right? Let me just add the Apocrypha as well. This is real, right? A theme now would be Islam, the Ish religion. Let me share a sub theme again. Nation of Islam would be a theme as well, right? All of the different Protestant churches would be theme. So a theme is something, is not the original. One could even say it's not even based on the original, it's loosely based on the original, but it's so deviated away from it that you call it a theme. So a person can make an original movie, which there hardly has been an original movie in the past 30, 40 years. So somebody made a movie and then they make movies themed on the movie. And if you have the spirit of discernment, which now I'm beginning to realize I always had, because I used to see movies and I could tell you where they got that movie from or where they got the idea from. Because they're theming, they get themes, and then what they then do is change characters. But if you spot, you will actually, even if they change the male character there to a woman one, you still spot it. Yeah, that's that one. That's that one. That's the jokey one. That's the fish one. You spot it. Why? Because that's what they're doing is theming, which sounds very close to scheming as well. So I would put that in there as well. But I'm just going to use their words. Themes. Containing reasons that will psychologically justify, because if you feel justified in what you're doing, meaning you feel that what I did was the right thing at the right time for me to do, then you're not going to clam up. You're going to freely speak. Whereas if you feel that you were unjustified in what you've done, you're going to do that. You're not going to say anything again. Or excuse the crime. Themes may be developed, developed, or changed to find one to which the accused is most responsive. So look how they're using psychology in you, right? So they're coming up with themes. In other words, they're coming up with alternative scenes or scenarios. That's a better way to explain it. And the one that you respond to psychologically, that's the one they pin on you because they come up with three themes, right? And then the one that you kind of respond to, they say, yeah, that's it because you responded. And then so this is how they're using psychology against you as well. Um, this is free now. Try to minimize the frequency of suspect denials. So what they try to do is speak in such a way that you can't use yes or no. So this is just showing you how devilish this is. Because when we're pushing the truth, we do the opposite. So we speak the truth, and when we're interacting with the Gorians or the Baghdad Jays, we often have to tell them, look, that's a yes or no answer. You don't need to do all of that. I ask you a specific question, yes or no, right? They do the opposite of that. They're not asking specific questions that require yes or no. And they don't want that either. They want you to explain and speak without a definitive no. You can say yes, yes, you did it, yeah, that's fine. But the no, they don't want the no, right? Because that's poking holes in the theme that they created, which they may have to change as well, because they say they can change them as well. Um, Point four, step four. At this point, the accused will often give a reason why he or she did not or could not commit the crime. So this is after like midway through the interrogation. Why? Because at this point, they're accepting the reality of the situation they're in, and now they're trying to defend. But it's pointless now at this time. Your defense should have been, I reserve my right to remain silent and I would like to speak to a lawyer and keep still. That's your defense, right? And let them do their job. If you were guilty, let them get the evidence. Not you volunteer the evidence. Why would you self incriminate? And if you're innocent, why would you incriminate yourself? It's, anyway, right. Try to use this to move towards the acknowledgement of what they did. Right, verse 5. Reinforce sincerity to ensure that the suspect is receptive. So this is going back to what they said in page 1. So I read it over. Let me read it over again. If I could find it. If I could find it. Um, oh yeah, here it is. So it's in the first paragraph of page 1. And it states, the technique is known for creating a high pressure environment followed by sympathy and offers of understanding and help, but only if a confession is forthcoming. So basically, at this point, you have said things or indicated things that alludes to a confession forthcoming. So that's the reason why at step 5, they reinforce sincerity to ensure, listen to this, that the suspect is receptive. So it's just an act, right, to get the suspect to be receptive to the things they're saying and the things they're requiring of them. Verse 6. The suspect will become quieter and listen. Why? Because by this point, the penny has dropped and they realize, like you realize you're in a trap, but the trap's already sprung. But just before it really hit you hard, you realize and then you get it. Yeah. So it's like that point of realization. So at that point of realization, what you should have done in the minute they stopped you or they brought you to no, they brought you to the interrogation. The minute the interaction began, you should have become quieter and listen. They're telling you. But no, you're doing it at step 6 of a 9-step process, after which they've already got how much information. But anyway, be that as it may, the suspect will become quieter and listen. Move the theme of the discussion. So bearing in mind, the themes are not real. The themes are created by the investigator who has a confirmation bias. He already has a pre-existing thought in his head that you are guilty, and he's projecting it onto you, right? That's what he's doing, right? So if you're removing the theme or trying to move the theme, you should, because it's a man-made thought designed to imprison you, enslave you, basically, to matazarium you, basically, put you back in Egypt. Um, this is really running me up, man. Move the theme of the discussion toward offering alternatives. So what they're saying is the suspect, he's starting to realize that he's like a crab. I'm sorry to use this analogy, but it's like a crab in a pressure cooker, right? So the crab is being cooked alive. He doesn't even know he's being cooked. But there's a certain point, right? Sorry to use this analogy, but there's a certain point where you realize, oh shit, I'm getting cooked. Right? So this is what's happening, right? Yeah, I'll use crab anyway because they bug. All of them here are bugged out anyway, right? But be that as it may, let me get back to it. 6, 7. Move the theme of the discussion toward offering alternatives. If the suspect cries at this point, infer guilt. Right. So just look how they're using psychology. So remember I listed out the steps of grief, right? So when you get to the point of depression, which leads to the point, I think it's anger, then depression, then no, then acceptance, right? You accepting your situation. So around that point, the depression, acceptance, or because the inter is not clear cut, so the interwoven. So you're depressed, but you get to the point of accepting, oh shit, this is really happening. So you might cry, or you might, show signs of sadness or mourning, right? Use that to infer guilt. This is what he's saying. Wow, wow. So we're on step 7 now. Pose the alternative question, given two choices for what happened. So this also is something that I've noticed with qualified liars. So qualified liars, what they do, they give you two options, both of which are incorrect. So you see Christian apologists, or if you're speaking to scoffers on the streets or people like that, they always give you a limited amount of ways to understand the thing. But actually there's more. So in any situation, there's three or more, right? Because the Most High designed everything and he designed it according to his nature. So the same way he said out of the mouth of two or more witnesses, right? And then it also illustrates that Yahweh is one, but he has one that is one with him, meaning that he's in one accord with him, which is Yahweh Shai. And then Yahweh Shai has the active spirit, which is the spirit of prophecy, or the spirit that he left, the comforter, right? This is the nature of the Most High, right? He has a certain way he does things. So that's why you will hear the phrase, the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, right? So a person can tell you the truth and withhold information, but everything he told you was the truth. But that's still not the whole truth. The person could give you the whole truth, right? But not give you nothing but the truth. That's still not the truth. The truth is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Yeah? So that applies even to this. Let me get it again. 7 of it here. Pose the alternative question. So alternative means it's not the real question. It's like an alternative reality. It's like a spin-off. It's like a theme. It's not actually what happened. It's not the real thing. It's an alternative to it, which is what the devil, what the not the devil, what the serpent did to Eve in the garden, right? So he just slightly changed the word to, if you eat of the fruit you will die, to if you eat of the fruit you will not die. He just added not. See what I mean? That's how they operate. Um, so let me go back again. Step 7. Pose the alternative question, giving two choices for what happened, one more socially acceptable than the other, right? So obviously you're gonna pick the one that's more so, sociably acceptable. So in other words, you're not even given a choice because you're gonna pick that one. They know you're gonna pick that one, right? The suspect is expected to see. The suspect is expected to choose the easier option, but whichever alternative the suspect chooses, alternative always means something other than the original or something other than the correct one. So alternative, you shouldn't even be going there, right? So the alternative to the Hathawara, what Tanakh, would be the Book of Mormon, would be the Quran, would be the Circle 7, would be the Haru would be the Bhagavad Gita. These are alternatives because some would argue they're scriptures. Even the Book of Mary and the Book of Thomas and the Book of Enoch, they would be an alternative. Why would you read an alternative when we have the original? Why would you even go there? Does it make sense? No, it don't make no sense. So let's go back. Alternatives. But whichever alternative the suspect chooses, which they already designed it for you to choose the most socially acceptable one, right? But you may choose the other one, doesn't matter. Guilt is admitted, so it's a trap. Because any one of those alternatives, you're admitting guilt. They got you, right? There is always a third, see the point? There is always a third option, which is to maintain that they did not commit the crime. That's the third option, but they don't give you that option. You see it there? It's even in the 9 steps. So we're in step 8. Lead them, usually like that, like that, lead them to repeat the admission of guilt in front of witnesses, right? Because why? Because according to the criteria of law, you need 2 or more witnesses, right? So having a police officer interrogate you for 24 hours or 40 hours under extreme circumstances, it negates any confession you bring out. So the first point is to crack you to get you to say what they want you to say. Once you've done that, now they want you to say that in front of witnesses that can corroborate that you said it freely, because when you said it the first time, it was under duress. Now they want you to freely say it. It's not freely, but an illusion of freely, so that now they could bring those witnesses to court and say, look, yeah, I was there when he said it. Yeah, he confessed. Da, 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 da. That's what they do. Go back here. Lead the suspect to repeat the admission of guilt in front of witnesses and develop corroborating information to establish the validity of the confession. Now, bearing in mind what the word's saying here isn't that the officers or the detectives are locating corroborative evidence, right? Because if they were locating corroborative evidence, they wouldn't have to use 9 steps to trap the guy. They would use the evidence against the guy. That's what they would do, right? But what they're actually doing is get the guy to confess, get the guy to say whatever he said, and then corroborate what he said with, I'm going to say this, right? I'm going to say it. So it's on me if it's wrong, but I'm going to say it. Place evidence where necessary. And that happened to OJ, because the officer that was first on the scene, he was off duty, and later on came to find out he placed blood and certain incriminating pieces of evidence outside OJ's house. He did that. So this is actually, they most probably tried to use, or actually did use, this 9 step of interrogation thing on OJ as well. Right? Um, step 9, document the suspect's admission or confession. So this is another thing that they do. So they don't necessarily have to tell you or inform you that you're being recorded, but you are being recorded. Why? Because the video that my beloved Ak Abadiah shared with me, it was a recording of an Edomite who was a heroin junkie running rings around. I think it was 2 different Edomite detectives, and it was recorded. So somebody leaked that video because they saw how he clowned them, and he said, "Look at this heroin addict outsmart 2 detectives." Right? But what they're not saying, he did outsmart them, by the way. But what they're not saying is, it is very difficult for a snake to use the techniques that a snake uses on another snake. That's why snakes eat snakes, but it's very difficult, it's very rare a snake's going to get a snake to eat. Why? Because they know each other's tricks, so it don't work on them. So that's the point. So anyway, we're back to step 9, so we're wrapping up now. Document the suspect's, oh yeah, I said that already. Document the suspect's admission or confession and have him or her prepare a recorded statement. So the reason why they get you to prepare it now, because when you prepare it, this is the evidence that they're going to use. They're not going to use the interrogation that's been recorded in court, because if they do, the judge or the defense lawyer is going to say, look, you breached the law. That was a breach of law. You were not supposed to do that. That's incorrect, right? So what they do, they use that, they create a confession, they create the environment that leads to a confession. They fabricate evidence based on what the confession or the confessioner said so that it matches with the confession, right? Then they get the individual to either write, sign and date, or verbally with an audio mechanism to say it, right? Like a testament, it's like a testament to testify against itself. Um, so here it's got in brackets. Now, bearing in mind, I've put this on the screen, so I'm hoping that you screenshot it. It's made a screenshot of it so you could see the information. Um, so in brackets it has audio, video, or written, right? So any one of them can be used against you, right? Especially if you wrote it down yourself, or if somebody wrote it and you signed and dated it, because that validates it, or they've got a video of you saying it, or they've got an audio of you saying it, right? Um, so now we're getting into the end of the lesson, right? I'm nearly finished, so let me just more or less like the conclusion of the matter, which is fear God and keep His commandments. But that's another story. Validity. Critics claim the technique too easily produces false confessions. That's not a claim. The first time it was used, it produced a false confession, and they had to pay the guy in 1955 $500,000, which in today's market would be like $50 million. Duh! Especially with juveniles. So imagine you're using this technique with minors who haven't got life experience and don't have the mental capacity to resist the wiles of the devil, right? Because the devil just means deceiver. So that's a perfect analogy. With second language speakers, right? So a second language speaker would be like, all right, for instance, like myself, my first language is English. I know a bit of Spanish, not as much as I used to, but I know a bit of Spanish. I know a bit of Portuguese, not as much as I used to as well. Because of that, I understand a bit of French as well. Because of my knowing Portuguese and Spanish, it helps. It helps me to understand the French and maybe even some Latin words as well, right? However, my first language would be English. So if somebody's speaking to me in Spanish, I don't fully understand every word that's said, but because I have a general understanding, I could pick out what is being said, right? I could pick it out, right? The same thing with the Portuguese, the same thing to a lesser extent with the French. I wouldn't even say lesser, because a lot of English words are actually French, so I'd say the same thing with French as well. But the thing is, a fluent French speaker would be able to trap me, right? If they're speaking very swiftly and speaking, let's say, a slang of French, they'd be able to trap me or they'd be able to say things and it might pass me by. But if it was in English, it doesn't matter how you say it or how you try to say it, it ain't passing me by. So that's the point, right, that they're trying to say. It has nothing to do with intelligence. It just has to do with the way that the human mind works, right? So let me get back to it. especially with juveniles, that's one, with second language speakers in their non-native languages. So if you're bilingual, they would try to speak to you in the language that you're less fluent in, right? And with people whose communication language abilities are affected by mental disability, including reduced intellectual capacity, right? So you could determine a person's intellectual capacity by having a conversation with them and by asking certain questions based on the answers or the response to the question, you can get a sense of where they're coming from. That's a better way to say it. You know, it sounds less Edomite. So you could get a sense of where they're coming from or where they're at. Yeah. Um, while this criticism acknowledges that the technique can be effective in producing confessions, and it's funny they keep on using the word producing. So producing isn't a word that should be used in a fair and a correct situation. Because to produce is to make or create something. That's what it means. So you shouldn't be creating or making a confession. You should be extracting or enabling the person to tell you the truth or to give you his confession. So the words that they're using, right, if you look at the synonyms of the word produce, you're going to understand why they use that word produce. So they're giving themselves a get out clause by using that, right? Because you're not supposed to produce a confession. It is not accurate at getting guilty parties to confess. So now it's going into the limitations of this technique. Also, it's indirectly proving that this technique is actually the best technique to use on Jakes, in particular Jakes who are innocent of a crime. Because it's going to produce a confession, right? This is what it's saying. Um, Whilst this criticism acknowledges that the technique can be effective in producing confessions, it is not accurate at getting guilty parties to confess. Instead, sweeping up people pushed to their mental limits by stress. So, a people who are pushed, who are at their mental limits of stress, right? We already know that's Yashala because we're under the curses, right? So that's why it's more effective on us. Right. It actually makes sense. Critics also dislike how police often apply the technique on subjects, and now they're calling them subjects now, of unclear guilt. Right? So, in other words, earlier on it said the investigators first imagining and then offering the suspect various psychological constructs, which justifies, or not justifies, which basically alludes to the officer having his own thought or his own determination that you're guilty based on these are what you would say, oh, my 20 years experience in the force, oh, my interaction with the community. I live in a multiracial community, so I've had interactions with Asians and with Jakes and with Elamites and whoever. So based on my understanding and based on the way that you're moving, I believe that you did it. Right. That's what it's saying. Right. But that's unclear because according to law, an individual is presumed innocent until proven guilty. So this unclear guilt, what it actually means is that people that have not been proven to be guilty, you have made an assumption of guilt and you've used a technique that is guaranteed to extract confessions from innocent people. Because the first time it was used, it did so. And you're doing this knowingly because you knowingly have an understanding of law, or be it limited, because they don't really teach police the law, but more procedures. But you have an understanding that suspect is presumed innocent until proven guilty. You cannot disclaim that. You know that. When simply gathering more police, when simply gathering more information in non-stressful interrogation can be more useful both for convicting guilty suspects and, at the same instance, exonerated innocent suspects. So this is the reason why they use stressful techniques, because non-stressful techniques is actually a better way to determine if somebody's guilty or innocent. So in other words, you're testing the spirit by the spirit. The concept comes from the Hatawara Watana Wanabaya, right? Which would be the instructions, Hatawara, the instruction, Watana, and the rest, Wanabayam, and the prophet. So the rest would be, because I still haven't figured out how to say New Testament, but the rest would be like the New Testament and Paul's letters and whatever, right? And the prophets. So you've got Moses and you've got the prophets, and you've got the rest, right? Um, so we're nearly finished, Israel. Of 311 people exonerated, and I would like to see if those people were Jakes, because I'm quite sure this 311 near enough are Jakes, Latinos, Indigenous, Aborigines. Very few of these are going to be Aisha or Adawan. Very few, guaranteed. But let me just read it. Of 311 people exonerated through post-conviction DNA testing, more than a quarter had given false confessions, right? So more than a quarter would be that would be like 75 or 76 or something like that. 76 people. Including those convicted. Now, this is, I'm going to mention this one, this is quite important. Including those convicted in such notorious cases as the Central Park Five. So, the Central Park Five, Israel, I want you guys to do some research on that. So, basically, it was five, it wasn't even five, I think it was three or four young black males that were in Central Park, and a woman, I believe, was raped, or she said she was raped, or something like that. The police picked them up, and then another boy that was hanging with them, they just picked him up as well because he was with them. And they used this technique to get a confession out of them, as well as Donald Trump, who was at the time based in New York. I think he had this Trump Tower or something, but he was based in New York. He took out a whole page, I think it was in the Daily News, or the New York Post, a whole page condemning them and saying, oh, they should get the death penalty and rare, 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 rare. Come to find out 20 years later that they were innocent. And they had to pay them. I think they did a Netflix thing on them as well, right? But they got convicted based on the same technique. So what I'm trying to show you, Israel, is that this technique is not a joke thing. We need to study the wiles of the devil. We need to be aware of the tools that he's employing, right? Not for us, because we have the spirit of discernment, but more than that, we're being led by Yahweh Basham Yahushai. So he's going to navigate us. If we rely on him and if we put our trust in him, he will navigate us through these traps, right? And if we fall in one, that's a judgment. We just deal with it, get up and deal with it. But this is more for like people that are now coming in the truth, or people that are just, when I say people, when I say people, I mean Yasha Allah, right? So that's, as I would say, they're scattered all over the world. They could look anyhow, right? We've got a young lad that's come to the camp now that's from Italy, he's from southern Italy, but he's a Jake. And when you look at him, he even look like a northern tribe. He don't even look really like a Edomite, to be honest. But how do you know? The spirit. We have to be spiritual. But anyway, getting back to the point. So we're getting to the conclusion of the matter. Last page, last two paragraphs. Let me just read it out. Some of the more minor details Reid proponed, Salakia, Reid propounded have since been called into question as well. For example, Reid believed that tells such as fidgeting was a sign of lying. Right, so this is where you get into the study of psychology and psychiatry. So what they do, they study the mind, they study the body, and they study the way that human beings react to certain set situations. And by the way, most of these studies were conducted in prisons. So you already know who they were conducting these studies on. And most of them were conducted during the 19th century and the early 20th century. This actually legally stopped during the Nuremberg trials. So that was done after World War II was ended, and then they came up with a code of conduct, one of which was you have to get consent and you have to fully disclose to the participants what it is you're doing to them. What is the purpose of your study, or what is the purpose of you conducting tests or psychological tests or physical tests. You're supposed to give them full disclosure. But prior to that, that's why you had the Tuskegee experiment. They also had one in Guatemala as well that went far longer than the Tuskegee, but people are not aware of that. That's why they conducted experiments on our women. That's where gynecology was created. All of this was done mainly on prisoners and what they call people that were mentally impaired, which is what they class our people as well. So anyway, we believe that tells, such as fidgeting, was a sign of lying, and more generally believe that trained police interrogators could intuitively check lies merely by how they were delivered. Later studies have shown no useful correlation between any sort of body movement, such as breaking eye contact or fidgeting, and truth telling. A better way of determining if somebody's lying or not is the way that our women do it. So, the way that our women determine if their husband or their children are lying is they make a very studious observation of the partner or the children during all phases of their emotions. So they get to kind of chronologically study and examine the mannerisms of the, let's say, the husband when he's happy, when he's horny, when he's hungry, when he's angry, when he's sad, when he's lying, even if it's a minor lie, if he's lying or if he's telling a not a lie, because we're ordered not to lie, but let's say you're withholding some of the information because maybe you don't want to, you don't want to inflict pain, or you're being not judgment, you're using discernment. But they read how, because they study you, right? They study you when you're unwell, when you're sick. Sometimes they tell you you're not feeling well before you even know you're not feeling well, because they study. Same thing with the children. They could tell when the children just done something naughty or he's about to do something naughty. Why? Because it's done through a spiritual gift that they have. It's a spirit of observation. They're not using a spirit of observation and discernment. They're using a spirit of guile. That's what they're doing. And that's what makes it perverse. Right? It's perverse. Um, yeah. While police can be effective at cracking lies, it is via gathering contradicting evidence. So this contradicting evidence, as I laid out earlier, is what they extract in the first phase of the investigation slash interrogation, which is the reason why you have a right to remain silent you have a right to an attorney, which most of us waive that right and start blabbering off our mouth. Oh man. Police officers have shown to be no better than average people at detecting lies merely from their delivery in studies. That's a fact. Several European countries prohibit some interrogation techniques that are currently allowed in the United States, such as a law enforcement officer. So notice they don't use police as much anymore. They use law enforcement officer. Why? Because just like this country, they privatized the services. So remember, the police were created initially to be slave catchers. And in this country, they were created initially to catch the serfs that were coming off of the feudal lands and coming into the public spaces, the cities. And a lot of them weren't working. So then they created the sus laws, and then they create police force to round them up, lock them up, and put them in workhouses. So believe it or not, the same thing they did it here as well, but in a variation. But they did the same thing here. Um, Let me get back again. Yeah, so law enforcement, because they're enforcing law. They're not police. They're not upholding the common law. They're enforcing law, policy law, or maritime law is what they're doing. Lying to a suspect about evidence. So number one, they get this from us because we, according to the Haftarah, the instruction, we are commanded not to lie or not to tell an untruth to a fellow Hebrew Israelite man, woman, or child. So that would be deemed a sin, or that would be deemed making false witness or making false claims. Right? That's a sin. Right? So what they're saying is there's certain European nations that still uphold that ideology or that idea. Um, Due to the perceived risk of false confession, it's not perceived risk. That's what it's a risk. I'm not even going to say that. Due to the risk of false confession, not perceived, and wrongful convictions that might result, that have resulted. You see how they're crafty. They're writing this in such a way to lessen the effects of what it is they're doing, to make it look, it's not really bad. It's not really, no, it's really bad. It's bad what they're doing. Due to the perceived risk of false confession, due to the risk of false confession and wrongful convictions that have resulted, particularly with juveniles. So they're doing it and that's a breach as well, because with a juvenile, no outside agency is supposed to interact with a juvenile without parental, how to put it, mediation. So just like we cannot directly speak to Yahweh, Bahasham Yahushua, we have to speak to him through his son, right? And likewise, they are not supposed to have the power to speak, to interrogate, to use this 9-step bullshit process on a juvenile. Juvenile means they're not an adult, right? Without, I wouldn't even just say a lawyer, without their parents or the guardians, as well as a lawyer being there, right? So that is a human right. That's a breach. For example, so to give an example now. For example, 136a of the German Strafprozessordnung, Strafprozessordnung, the PO, which is the Code of Criminal Procedure. So they have a Code of Criminal Procedure in Germany. Bans the use of deception and intimidation, interrogation. So they rubbish Germany a lot, the Nazis and Hitler, but Germany actually is one of the most superior nations in Europe, right? Not just in the products and the way that they do things, but also the way they deal with the law. So the way they're dealing with the law here unlike our police, because our police is the opposite of this. They ban the use of deception, which is guile, and intimidation, which is force under duress in interrogation. The Reid method also conflicts with the German, and by the way, their country's name is not German. So the same thing that Israelites do to us, which is rename us and label us, they also do it to other people as well. So the name that Germans, we call them Germans, the name they call themselves, or the name of their country they call themselves, is Deutschland, right? Deutschland. So calling it German is the same way like calling America America, or calling Trinidad Trinidad when it's actually Irish, right? Kind of like that Irish. That's the name. See, that's the name, Irie, yeah? That's the real name, right? Which means Watford, right? So what they like to do is rename and rebrand, right? So I'm just correcting that because I'm quite sure Germans are, people of the Deutschland are totally fed up of hearing people incorrectly call their name. But I'm just going to say it because it's here. The German police obligation to adequately inform the suspect of their right to silence. Right. So I'm finished with a little lesson. Right. Um, the reason why I brought it out, let's be honest, when you look at the stats of incarcerated individuals, um, for instance, in America, I'm not sure how much it is here, but I know in America it's like something like 75 to 80% Black, Hispanic, and Native um, Americans, Indigenous, Aborigines. I'm quite sure the stats are similar here as well, although the demographic is not the same. But I'm quite sure we have an extraordinarily high amount of incarcerated Black, Latinos, Indigenous, Aborigines. Over here, it's going to have a contingent of West African as well, because we have more West Africans here, and there are brothers as well. So I just want to give the information, right? Because being a prophet, I'm not saying I'm a prophet, but being a spokesperson for Yahweh Hashem Yahushai, right, means that we give our people. Actually, that's one piece I'm going to read. I'll read that one. Isaiah 58. Read that. I can't do a whole lesson without at least reading one. That would be like, I can't wait. Read that one. Yeah, so this is the book of Isaiah, chapter 58 and verse 1. So this is basically what we're supposed to do. Cry aloud, spare not, lift up thy voice like a trumpet. This is the point now. Show my people their transgressions and the house of Jacob their sins. So I'm using the information I have to aid our people in making better decisions. But the best decision Bani Shal Yashala can make, or the children of Israel can make, is to come back to the Lord's statutes and commandments, repent and be converted, yeah, and also to teach others to do so as well, because we want to get the hell out of there. I don't know if you feel like me, but I've so had enough of this place. It's not even funny. So with that, I like to give all praise and honor to Yahweh. Actually, let me do it the way I do it. Kalal al Yahweh, Ba'asham Yahweh, Waharaka Kadash, Kal Halalium, Wapalalium, Wakabadia, Yahweh, Ala Shadia, Hamalak, Hamashiach, Yahweh Shai, Tawada Yahweh, Tawada Yahweh Shai, Barakata Yahweh, Barakata Yahweh Shai, and Yahweh Yahweh, and Yahweh Yahweh Shai. And with that, that's it. Shalom, Wahab, Israel.